you will probably eventually need your phone book, because I'm not gonna talk to you for an hour. But, we're gonna talk comparison and contrast. You've already read the chapter, and I think you've already taken a quiz on it. And I just kinda wanna go over it and make sure that nobody has any questions. And I am more than 6 feet away from you, Sienna. Do you feel safe for me to take my mask off to film? Okay, because you're the closest. I think we're at that stage of recovery where it's probably okay as long as I stay back here and don't talk too long. So the main thing, what is a comparison and contrast essay? That's the simplest place to start. Just throw it out there.
Where you compare and contrast two things.
Yes. Or you take two things and talk about their similarities and differences. You're almost always talking about one primarily. You're almost always saying two things seem different but are actually very similar, or that they seem similar but are actually very different. So almost always in a comparison contrast essay, your argument is going to come down kind of on one side or the other. That it doesn't have to be the case, but it almost always is. You're making some larger point by comparing and contrasting things. And the main pitfall, and this was on your quiz, what is the single most common error in a comparison and contrast essay? Yes, ma'am. Most commonly, when people really struggle with the comparison and contrast essay, the key mistake they've made is choosing something that nobody cares about. So, that's something that you have to ask yourself, and when you get to your workshops for this paper, for this unit paper, that will actually be one of the workshop questions. How has the author solved this problem? Have they made this something that you care about? Or have they chosen something that you inherently care about? So that's going to be something that I'll ask you to look for specifically when reviewing other people's work. Other than that, the key concern in comparison and contrast comes down to choosing a method of development. So what do we mean by that? Louder than that, Sienna.
The point by point method or the block?
Yes. You can either go point by point, or you can go block. So let's say I want to compare I like dogs. Anybody else like dogs?
Me.
No.
Yeah. Easy done.
Mm-hmm.
It's a easy done. Have to use it as good. They're like
Let's say I want to compare Aussies, that's an Australian Shepherds, to Beagles. Okay, I want to do a compare and contrast. Because if you're talking about a big Beagle, they're about the same size, give or take, right? But they're very, very different dogs. If I were going to do that in a block pattern, what would that look like?
You do one whole thing about the Aussies and then one whole thing about the Beagles.
Thank you, Mr. Ham. So I would say something like, Aussies are this size, this personality, and what else do we care about with dogs?
Colors.
Okay, and this color. And then we would say, Beagles are this size, this personality, and this color, right? And then when we got done, we would most likely determine that, if not that one is necessarily better than the other, that one is necessarily better for something than the other. So it might be as simple as, if you want a dog to protect your house, because neither of these are dogs that you would automatically choose as guard dogs, right? So we might be trying to decide, if I want a dog this size and kind of this temperament, which one would make a better guard dog? So you may not be saying that one is necessarily in all cases better than the other, but you may be saying one is more protective than the other. Or if you want a guard dog who's not gonna ever get aggressive, but will always be loud, maybe you would choose a Beagle. If you want one that can be trained to actually protect your house, maybe you want the Aussie. So you're making those kind of distinctions, but you're always gonna say that one works out to be better for something than the other. Now, if we were doing that point by point, how would we do it?
Explain the size.
Now, most likely I haven't chosen the exact criteria if I were going to, if this were actually a paper about choosing a guard dog, right? In fact, well, somewhat we would. If we took color out of there, and did ease of training. Or even if you wanted to say aggression, something like that. That kind of brings us into line more with this imaginary thesis I'm going toward. But point by point method of development, in an outline, for instance, instead of outlining by, like, your first level is the breed, and then underneath that you have criteria. You'd start with criteria, and underneath that you'd have breed. So you'd have an entire section talking about size, Aussies, Beagles, an entire section talking about personality, Aussies, Beagles, an entire section talking about training, for instance, Aussies, Beagles. Is everybody clear on that? So that's also something in your comparison and contrast essays that we'll be looking at when you do your workshops. So this is a unit, I don't believe there's an actual outline in this unit, like I don't make you turn one in, but it would be a good idea for you to kind of do one on your own. It doesn't have to be fancy, you could do it on scratch paper even, but kind of line out for yourself which one you think would be better. Okay, did anybody have any trouble with these chapters? What we are doing for now, I think you have time to do it, probably to finish it today. For, let's say for Thursday, there are models in the back of the book, and I forget which chapter it is, but it's up, it'll pop up here in a minute on Google Classroom. I think it's chapter 30. No, that's definition. Chapter 29. Read chapter 29, those are model essays in the comparison and contrast, just like we did with definition. And respond to those. This will pop up in Google Classroom in a minute, you don't have to remember it. So, questions? You all seem to have this chapter down, at least those of you who do. Okay, I'll give you some time to work so you don't end up having to do it tonight. What?
Chapter 29?
It is chapter 29. It's the comparison and contrast chapter. And for you all out in TV land too, I'll give you a chance to work some.